Thank you all for joining the webinar today on the topic of TPRM efficiency, leveraging unified questionnaires and control framework. I hope everyone can hear me. I'm just doing a quick audio check and a video check. Hopefully everyone are able to hear us. Perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Priya. Thank you for confirming that. Okay, thank you all once again for joining us. I'm Venkat. I head the practice for audit consulting and TPRM in CyRAACS. I've been with CyRAACS for more than 6 years and in the IT and security space from 2010. Predominantly working on the regulatory space, not just from the audit perspective, but both from a risk assessment and also leading a lot of third party and vendor risk assessments. So this is the one of the series of the webinars that we are doing towards customers and users moving towards a platform based compliance rather than being with a very manual and an Excel based effort. I have Shubham with me. Shubham, if you can quickly introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I am a CISA certified auditor. I lead the audit service in CyRAACS. I handle multiple regulatory audits from RBI, SEBI, and IRDAI perspective. I also am involved in multiple TPRM projects from major banks and NBFCs across India. So, in our recent past, in the past assessments that we have done, I have noticed something peculiar about organizations facing multiple consistent challenges within the TPRM space, regardless of the size or the maturity that they are in infosec, from an infosec perspective, of course. So here in this webinar, we hope to break some ice around it and also provide some insights to simplify the ever expanding risks that are there within the TPRM space for managing third parties as well as contractors and vendors. So I'll let Venkat speak, talk you through the next topic. Yeah, Venkat.
Thank you, Shubham. So yes, just setting the context around, right? I just want to say, in over the past decade, right, the combined force of startup India, digital India, and the relentless API-driven innovation has created a marketplace where no single organization builds an end-to-end stack anymore, right? Today we are in the world where we see businesses are operating in a very sprawling partner ecosystem, right? Banks are plugging into fintechs, cloud analytic firms are plugging in with various entities, right? Whether be it financial institutions or hospitals, right? Then comes your KYC, which is part of the fintechs, and there are multilingual call centers just at the plug and play mode, right? So business today is expanding very fast, right? And they are not waiting for something to be built right from scratch and not looking at building on their own, but they are more looking at the partner and the vendor ecosystem, right? In expanding their business, pacing the business very fast, right? Having said that, right, what has happened, right? The business have a very high reliance on vendors, partners, third parties. At the same time, one of the things that business potentially organizations may fail to understand is that it's brutally unforgiving when something breaks in this chain, and that is what third party risk management is, right? Managing your risk in the in with your vendors, with your partners. I'll take a very simple example today, right? How we go, and let's say I'll take an example of, let's say I want to go and purchase a bike, right? Today I go to the showroom, or even before I go to the showroom, okay? So what happens is I want to go to the website and wanted to know about the bike or the scooter, whatever it is. But today no website allows you to just like that explore unless you give at least some basic details out here there, right? The moment you give that basic details, a lot of things happens in the back end. So potentially there is a customer for the automobile partner. The automobile partner has to sell, and he doesn't know whether the customer has the enough finance or not. So Potentially there is a financial or a lending partner there. They connect you with the financial institutions, predominantly maybe the banks and NBFCs, right? So as you provide this data, even by the time you go for a test drive, right, your data potentially with your consent is what I hope is shared with the banks, and you have started getting informations and calls that are you interested to buy a bike, do you need a loan, right, and this is the interest rate. Maybe some years back, anyone who wants a loan, they have to go to the bank, and maybe one bank alone gives the loan, not many multiple banks. Today it's just reverse. As someone even has an intent to purchase something, right, they have the customer as a king has an option to choose from various banks. Okay, and by the time, by maybe by within 6 to 8 hours, based on the credit, okay, a credit score rating is immediately provided, KYC is done and everything, right, and by that time, by the time, like maybe say 6 to 7 hours, the customer has a loan sanctioned, and even the potentially the bike, from the financial. So there is a lot of backend data for the customer. It was just giving the mobile number and the email ID and the name, but there is a bank involved, there is a fintech involved, there is a KYC company involved, there is a credit scoring company that gets involved. All of this gets done in a matter of time, but all of this is done from a financial institution which is potentially giving out the loan, and the dealer which is selling the automobile, right? Your PI data is shared and everything. All of this is done by the vendors, right? Now, again, in this span, if one of them is not going to work, right, all of them are going to lose the business. That's how serious the supply chain risks are, right? Because the customer at the end of the day did not get a good experience of what he or she was told, or potentially was an expectation that was created on, right? Now this is one. Another example, very quick example I may want to say, is that 2 3 years back, a financial institution had to pause its very very critical service of credit card business because one of their vendors was non-compliant to a regulatory requirement, right? What did the financial institution do wrong here? Nothing. They want to connect with partners and vendors to fast their business, but it was just maybe a lack of oversight of anything. But just because of one vendor not complying almost 1 to 1.5 years, they had to go through the pain of getting back into the business after proving compliance, not directly but maybe indirectly through, because the vendor had to prove compliance back to the regulators. So now this is what we want to change. We understand what the challenges are out there, right? How organizations are finding it difficult, and being to keep up with the pace of managing third party risk as the business is growing faster and faster, right? And this is what we want to address today. Shubham, you have conducted a lot of assessments in the past few years, right? How was it before, and what is something that you see is changing?
Thank you, Venkat. So, in the recent past, the assessment that we have carried out, what we have seen is the teams are relying mostly on the Excels and the spreadsheets. It is more of a manual effort dominant world now in the TPRM space. So, this indeed hinders the business activities with a higher tag on background checks, and there are onboarding checks as well. So because the business is hindered, the experience is not good from a TPRM perspective for the vendors as well as the organizations as well. But due to the automation that we have brought out in our TPRM framework recently of late, so I get to receive multiple client feedbacks stating the response time from the vendor has drastically lessened down, as well as the client experience from TPRM framework setup wise also has improved. Yeah, that is my feedback from that perspective.
Perfect. I think, yeah, that's very interesting, and I think, yeah. See, that's one. Like, I'll just give a quick snapshot of how the landscape, right, as we move, how to tackle this challenge, and how the future we want to be, right. The digital economy in the country is almost 1 trillion, right? It's going. Most important, 75% of enterprises have increased their reliance on third parties, right? So potentially for every activity there is a third party involved, almost. So no cycle or no transaction in its end to end form is completed just by the business or the enterprise itself. They have to rely on third parties, right? Another thing is very serious and potentially highlighting for me is, as a cybersecurity practitioner, is that in the last 3 years 87% of organizations have experienced a third party incident. I'm not saying it's a data breach or anything, but it may be a data breach, it may be a downtime, or it may be a business issue, anything. But due to a third party issue, there has been an incident. Potentially, it has, the business was paused, or rather, there has been an impact to continuous business. So this is something that, the reliance on third party, and also says that the oversight on third parties has to increase, right? Now, Shubham, again, you've been working with the regulators. You can just throw on what the regulators are, how the regulators are driving, across each of this space, and in what form, and what is driving TPRM in the regulatory space also.
Yeah. From that perspective, see, Venkat, I think from infosec requirement wise also, everything is driven by the regulator itself, just like TPRM. Now, for TPRM, we have multiple regulatory standards given out by RBI, SEBI, then IRDI, and the landmark, of course, DPDPA, which speaks about responsibilities of companies taking customer data, then data sharing between vendors and contractors, and then there has to be a privacy impact analysis that has to be conducted for vendors. The major chunk of the requirement comes from RBI, of course, as part of IT outsourcing, and the framework that they have defined is actually superb.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. I think on DPDPA, the one other point that everyone would want to also maybe make a note of is that, right, privacy, the DPDPA laws is not just for the organization itself. It is going to have an impact on the vendor risk or the third party risk management also, because the data fiduciaries, which is the organization which is responsible for collecting the customer data and potentially sharing it with any data processors, now has to also make sure that the data processors are compliant to the privacy law, which basically expands the scope of managing third party risk, whether the data processors, which are nothing but the partners and vendors, are also compliant to it, right? As we go through this, I just wanted to, just give a snapshot on what's the current state it's all about, right? Potentially what we see, and from our various experience in the last few years, is that, right, third party data has been a potential blind spot, right? Organizations are focusing on completing the assessment. They want to be compliant to the regulatory mandates, rather than they want to effectively manage the risk of the third parties. See, when I say effectively manage the risk of third parties, one, it comes from the traditional model where due diligence is conducted, right? And there is a third party being managed by the procurement team. Then there is an IT team, security team, and there are business teams which are directly involved in managing third parties. So there is potentially, it's a siloed ownership. So, right? So there is not a central function on third party risk management, right? To just add to that, I just want to say it again, the third party risk management is not a security function per se alone, right? It is an operational metric that organizations have to start understanding, where security plays a very important aspect in managing the risk of, security risk from the vendors, right? The other thing is on the risk categorization. What we see is vendors are not categorized, okay, or classified based on the criticality that they have, right? So one size fits all, one assessment may fit all, and then the vendors are given a lot of questionnaires. This is where one of the feedback was that the vendors are not responding to a lot of questions. Potentially nobody likes to answer a lot of questions which they are not, not applicable for them, and things like that, right? And due diligence has been considered a very important aspect, rather than ongoing mechanism of monitoring or any kind of an ongoing assessment. I will come to this topic because this is something that we feel there is a very important change that has to be made in the third party space. Again, on in terms of monitoring the risk with the third parties. Like I said, it's just a one-time compliance check that is being looked at. However, I think the way organizations should move forward is to find a way to continuously monitor the risk of third parties. When I say they have to continuously monitor the risk of third parties, is that so define some form of a KPI, right? Define a measurement, define a performance measurement for the vendors, predominantly the critical vendors, and assess them in a lighter way but more rigorously in a more high frequency. So this gives an assurance to the organization that the critical vendors, I do not have, or I have mitigated as much risk with my critical vendors. So this is one very very interesting thing that people have to look at. And not just that, by doing a continuous monitoring of your vendors through a KPI on the vendors, what happens is over a period of time, in a span of 1 year, where you have to do one more big assessment with the vendor, that comes down, and you also have created a continuous form of assurance of your risk, right? The another thing that Shubham kind of was telling me is that in many places where we are auditing and we are assessing, the third party agreements were not exactly in line with the actual mandates, right? Some of them lack the audit rights. There is a general confidentiality agreement, but however, the data handling process and the security requirements, the awareness to the vendors were also on the lower side. And the termination, right? Does the vendor delete data? Have they purged the data? Have they taken out all the data as you come out of a relationship with the vendor and moving on to another vendor or something? This is another blind spot that we saw, right? On adding to all this, right? There's so much to be done on third party risk management. Adding to all this, the process is manual. It's all Excel driven, right? As it is Excel driven, the analytics, okay, central analytics is also a very difficult thing to achieve. As the data analytics is on the lower side, right? And also in terms of collecting data with a lot of email follow-ups and everything, there is a audit fatigue. On top of it, the decision making is not faster. The business wants to move faster. The business is indeed moving faster, but however, the decision making towards managing risk with the third parties are not catching up, is what we see, right? Again, what is our idea and how do we want to address this, right? One of the things that we want to propose is having some form of an unified questionnaire, because like we said, there are multiple regulatory mandates, right? A unified questionnaire to manage the assessments from the third parties, right? Potentially creating a question library that is mapped to various regulations, and not just regulations but also standards. Let it be ISO, let it be RBI requirements, SEBI, IRDA, anything. Potentially have a unified questionnaire along that. From the unified questionnaire, as it is mapped to a multiple control framework or multiple regulations, right? You are very clear that my assessment in its right form is hitting all the right areas for the vendor. I am compliant to the regulatory requirements, and at the same time, I am managing the risk of my vendors very holistically, right? Which is very, very more important, right? And when this is combined with a potentially some form of an automated system and a smart platform, right, eliminates your duplication of questionnaires. You can have some dynamic questionnaires, and potentially one of the important thing, like I said, is the response from the vendors are can be faster, right? We have seen, being in the space, we have seen on-site assessments and remote assessments. Some challenges we see sometimes with the on-site assessments is the data gathering is just on the the it's more of a spot to check whether things are in place, but the audit trail and the data collection has to be more solid, right? I have this data, the vendor indeed was compliant and my vendor is indeed compliant to these requirements, is something that the internal audit teams of an organization wants as they want to review the vendor also, right? So this one. Now, this is on the unified questionnaire and the control framework that we want to suggest, and potentially on the continuous KPI monitoring, right? One of the key features is that the questions unified questionnaire is also going to create a sub form of creating a set of key KPI performance metrics for the vendors, where you want to assess them potentially in a quarterly way, or at least to start with, say no, in a more half-early manner, right, than doing once a year or once in 2 years. You don't know what happens with the vendors for the other part of the time, right? An incident could have happened, they may not have informed you, or they have informed you potentially late. All this is something that you have to be on top of, right? Now, what is the case for a platform driven compliance? Why we are saying that, the Excel method and the manual method of doing assessments is getting very, very tedious, right? Why? So in the traditional way, like we said, okay, the Excel method documentation is very heavy, right? And in terms of data collection, it is over an email, right? It has to be a lot of back and forth, and potentially former emails have to be written, and every email have to be checked as to where and which, which data was given, then take it to the SharePoint. On top of it, the at the end of the day, for the management and the top management, right, they have to make decisions. They want to make decisions fast, and for that, quick analytics. And today, in today's AI world, analytics and everything has to be literally on demand. And this is what a platform driven TPRM service will change, right? First things, it will shorten the timeline, right? As vendors will start responding more, you are able to contact them even better. Second, your data collection is all in a single place with a proper audit trail. And as you scale, when I say as you scale, I want to a new line of services come, a new regulation has come, potentially most of the things is already mapped. I want to increase, or I want to just do a set of assessments for them. It has to be just, at the click of a button. So the scaling has to be faster. On top of it, all this data is helping in automated form of a scoring model, automated data analytics, which is basically helping in the management making better decisions toward managing their third party risk, right? We have seen the case for a platform driven compliance, right? It has increased the visibility by 90%, efficiency, and the cost efficiency has been brought down. There is always a feeling that a platform is going to be expensive or something, but it is not. Over a period of time, it will reduce cost, and 100% we have seen it. And predominantly the audit fatigue, the optimization of the audit, 60% it has created shorter timelines, maybe in the longer run. So as we do this, what happens is more audits, more assessments to be done in the same period of time, and that is what we want to propose, right? Now, many of our clients who are already using know that we have something called a homegrown GRC platform called Compass. Within that Compass, there is a separate TPRM module, right? Just focused on your third party risk management, right? Like we said, with our experience over a period of time, we have seen how and what are the critical things and critical factors to consider. One, like we said, the vendor risk profiling and tiering is there, right? So it is easy to profile your vendors and accordingly send out assessments, so you don't have to select and pick and choose assessments every time. As the vendor is classified in a specific tier, and automated assessments will start shoot out, right? Second, you have an unified library of questions. So as and when you want, you create dynamic questions, and each vendor's the questions on the dynamic level can be easily sent out. And more importantly, like I said, the continuous monitoring of KPI. Again, this is maybe a sub of a questionnaire, but the platform is ready made and instantaneous for you to continuously create a quarterly assessment, right? So as you create an assessment, automatically in the next quarter, it will start asking for more data, or rather the same data, whether they are continuously, adhering and compliant to your requirements. So organizations, if you ask me, organizations want to always know that everyone is compliant. It is not just an internal question that are we compliant, are we compliant, but more today that internal question is also sprawling to the vendors, right? Okay, are we compliant, are our vendors also compliant is the question, because we inherit the risk of vendors. So right, so all this put together, one very important aspect is the issue management, right? When I say issue management, it is about the risk coming from the vendor assessments. How are we managing it? How can we try to reach out to the vendors to close it faster, and also project it back to the management, so that we know the overall vendor, the scoring and the risk managed by the vendors are very, very clear, right? It's almost 20-25 minutes. As we take your questions, just one last slide on how really Compass works and setting it up. It's a very instantaneous setup. It's a SaaS platform, right? As you know, it takes maximum 6 to 8 hours to set it up. And once we set it up, your vendor assessments and the vendor profiling has to be started. And as you profile your vendors, then we have to start building. Potentially there are pre library questions also available. Based on that, you can start your vendor assessments and then start your continuous program complaints. So that's pretty much. I think there is a lot of questions that has come, right? We will start taking one by one. And again, thank you. I hope this was very helpful. I will start taking the questions one by one. Okay. Okay. I think one of the questions on Sashikant Iyengar, how can automation and AI ML be used to pre-populate and validate questionnaire responses? What are the risks associated with this approach? Okay. So Sashikant, as we speak with you, right, we have already started building an automation way of validating the response. When I say the response predominantly in the audit language and the cybersecurity language, I can say the artifact and the documentation, right? So it is definitely going to help, right? One, in validating your responses in a faster way. Yes, there is a learning curve, but it will definitely drastically change the way. We believe tomorrow with the help of AI, systems can directly pull out data and potentially tell you the live compliance data of your vendor, right? Including the patch level maintained by your vendor. I don't see any problem if your AI is able to pull the data instantaneously and showcase that this is the patch level status that they are maintaining, right? In terms of pre-populating, yes, right, AI can be used. Here again, a learning curve is there, but we are seeing quite a bit of good learning curve here, where we are able to pre-populate questionnaires, and dynamic questionnaires are even being suggested. So this is definitely a good thing and moving in the right direction. Can you share metrics, KPIs that have been most effective? Right. So I'll just on the KPI metrics, I'll maybe give an example here, right? Okay. Like I'll take three KPIs, right? Three, four KPIs. One of the things is maybe every quarter you want to make sure that your vendors, the level of patches they maintain is, indeed within the threshold. Have they closed their VAPT, or the vulnerabilities that they have identified in their infra or their applications? Have they closed it on time, right? Has there been any incident in the last quarter, right? Have they done their access reviews? Have they removed all access which are not required upon termination or anything? So all this kind of KPI metrics can be put on the vendors and assessed every quarter. So this is faster and gives you a far more assurance, focused on the exact services they provide rather than focused on the organizational level controls, right? When I say policy, which is anyways reviewed and approved once a year, practically speaking, and every quarter, there's no point in asking. But more important risk and the real threats are there in whether there is an incident, whether they have maintained their patch, whether their vulnerabilities are being closed, right? Okay, fine. Manish, thank you. What emerging risk should TPRM questionnaires address in 2025 and beyond? Okay. Okay. So in terms of emerging risk, one very key area is artificial intelligence, AI and ML. Okay. Organizations today are using AI, potentially like the IT shadow problem. Every organization today is using AI. Now, whether they are sharing their data, whether they are using a office workspace which may not take the training data, nobody knows about this. More importantly, products today are getting built using AI, right? A product company today potentially is looking at building their product faster than ever before, right? Developers know this, okay, and potentially it is taking 1/5 or maybe 1/4 of the time it was taking, but AI is generating these codes, right? We go back to the basics to make sure that your VAPT, your source code coding risk are all there, but at the same time, I would only say I will take the best practices of 42001. There is one more ISO which not is not very popular because maybe it's in the draft stage. One is 27090. It talks about the cybersecurity risk and the infosec risk in for an organization in using AI for its development or for their ongoing business. So the best practices from there has to be definitely considered. And yes, supply chain, we don't know what our vendors are using. We have to definitely take into consideration, right? Um, okay, fine. Manish, on the other one, what are the common pitfalls of relying solely on questionnaires for TPRM and how can they be mitigated? Okay. Now, here, this is where a risk based approach has to be taken. It's not easy, but at the time of understanding and profiling the vendor, right, we have to understand the service they provide. We have to understand the risk associated with that service and focus on that, right? Now, when it comes to questionnaires, right, like we said, a huge questionnaire of 500 questions may not be helpful for any organization to move forward or potentially, reach the final goal with vendors. Vendors are looking at 150 questions, 100 to 150 or maximum 200 questions where they want to say and prove it, okay, that what is this is the service I'm providing to you. Ask me those questions, I will, prove it to you and I will continue, right? So questionnaires will be there. We have to rely on questionnaires at some point. That's the base, right? But based on the tiring, we have to ask the right questions to the vendors, is what I would say. Okay, I think Anu, your question is somewhere answered in the previous way, right? Okay. Siddharth, can we integrate this with BitSight, Scorecard, Backlight, and other scanning tools? If so, combine questionnaires and the scan. 100% yes, Siddharth. I think in the long run, this will be there. I'll be open and transparent. There has been cases where third-party assessments have been just based on BitSight scoring, right? I know I don't personally prescribe to it because just by a BitSight scoring of a website of a vendor does not really call out the risk managed by the vendor, or rather potentially the risk that we inherit, right? There is far more beyond a public facing website that the vendor manages for the services provided to a specific client or multiple clients at the same time, right? But the insights and real time data coming from BitSight scoring, potentially dark web monitoring, right, and other places can help in trying to identify and also, provide scoring to the vendors, and this is something that we are also already working on. Okay, on pricing and something we will make note of, and I maybe will catch up separately. Yeah, okay. Aditya, can KPI monitoring reduce or eliminate to need to conduct detailed assessments for vendors? Perfect. Okay. So Aditya, yes, definitely it can reduce and eliminate the need to conduct a detailed assessment, right? How? Right? One, as we define the KPIs for the vendors potentially based on the service, right? We are not looking at more than maybe maximum of 15 or 20, maximum 15, 20 of KPI that is to be measured every quarter, right? Then the other assessment, I am not going to say that you don't worry about how they have defined and what is the, the organization's mandate, because for me, policy is nothing but the organization's intent, right? So we should not oversee the organization's intent in managing security. That can be done once a year, not very detailed, but by doing a continuous monitoring, what happens is you are getting better assurance. By getting better assurance, you will eventually reduce your load on your yearly assessments, right? Because your KPIs on a quarterly basis that you are getting assured or rather assessing has given far more assurance on the system and the data that is being given or rather managed by the third party. So that gives, again, how can GRC platform, this has already been considered, and this is something, a vision coming from our management also, especially from our CEO CTO, right? Third party risk and, simplify third party, simplify overall compliance to a very lightweight SaaS platform. That's the idea. So this has been built, and as you create any questionnaire, for me KPI is also one more kind of a questionnaire, but create a light based questionnaire and initiate the assessments every quarter, right? So I think that's pretty much on the questions. Most of the questions I hope we have answered. And thank you all. Thank you, Shubham. It was great presenting with you. virtually meeting, a lot of people, definitely helpful. We hope to continue this series of webinars on the platform adoption and the effectiveness and the efficiency of using platform based and predominantly in the compliance space from the overall GRC perspective, right? Thank you all. Look forward to meeting you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you,
all.
everyone.
Good day.